Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and today I'm reviewing both The Reluctant Fundamentalist and Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. Both books I've been willing to check for a long time. I thought I needed something completely different from the stuff I've been reading of late, stuff relating to my PhD research, mainly Jonathan Lethem and Jennifer Egan. I found them both at an Oxfam very cheap, and I decided to read them in the span of a few days, and I'll be the first to admit that it doesn't necessarily make sense to review the two books in the same video, besides for the fact that they're from the same author. If not that they are two very short books. If you liked either of these, I'm probably going to recommend the other, and if you don't know neither one or nor the other, please keep watching, because I think there's something here you might appreciate. I mentioned that they are both short, but I do not believe either of these qualifies as a novella. I'm not an expert in the field. I'm not necessarily 100% sure what technical definition would apply there, but to me it felt like both books, although very short, had the kind of heft you expect of a novel, even though The Reluctant Fundamentalist, and I'm going to start with this one, is one of those rare books that I would highly recommend you read in a single sitting. I read it in a single day, and that made for a beautiful reading experience, especially considering that it made very much sense considering the type of book this is. This is a first-person narrative where basically a person living in a Pakistani city meets a tourist and tells them the story of his life in the course of an afternoon and evening. And this frame narrative, the brilliancy of it, is one of the many things that makes this an astounding novel. It allows the narrator to play very beautifully, and the writer to play very beautifully with the narrator's tone while discussing with this tourist. The narrator is always very polite with this American tourist. At times he sounds almost condescending, and it is clear that this is the story. Well, this story is narrated by someone who feels that type of smoldering rage maybe toward America and toward in general the Western culture, but it's never too clear throughout the course of the novel whether this is, say, a gentleman's opinion, informed opinion of world events, or whether it is a fundamentalist, blind and seething rage toward America as a country and toward Western culture. And this is very superficial for the very simple reason that anyone reading this book will pick this up. If you've read it, I'm sure you picked it up. But there lies one of the greatest things about The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which is played very simply. This is, again, is very simple to pick up, but it's still genius. The fact that this is a narration, it's this kind of dialogue between the narrator and this tourist. You always only hear the narrator's side, but the dialogue is still very clear and perceivable. It's clearly the dialogue between two prejudiced people, but it's never too clear whether the narrator's references and small jokes about the fact that maybe Americans do not know that much about the rest of the world, and they usually, generally speaking, don't maybe speak many languages besides their native one. It's never too clear whether these jokes, what level of threat is implied in these jokes. But the frame narrative, for all that it occupies such a prominent role in, at least it did in my experience, it felt almost as important as the recollected events. It occupies only a marginal role, it plays only a marginal role in the novel. You usually only hear it at the beginning and end of chapters, sometimes in the middle. It also has the very obvious showmanship effect of maybe sometimes foreshadowing a later event in the story of this narrator, or maybe again making you interested to uncover the secret of this narrator. What is he really like? What happened to him that made him change so much from the idealistic and optimistic young man so in love with America that you encounter in the early pages of the book? And one thing I should mention about those early pages is, my God, is this novel, I mean, does it get addictive very fast? By the time you reach page 10, 15, you already get to know a nice slice of the main character's life. You get to know where he's from, what kind of context he grew up in, what kind of family he is from, what his first experiences of America and Europe are. And another layer I should mention to the playfulness of the whole experience is that I am not, and I'm going to ask you if you've read this book, I'm not entirely sure up to what point this American tourist that is the addressee of the narrator, up to what point he is supposed to stand in for the reader, up to what point the novel is conscious of its supposed, say, target or model reader. That's a very complicated question if we analyze it in literary critical terms, but to keep it very simple, you know, sometimes the narrator will give you maybe some very strong opinion on a specific event. This is by the way, it's one of those novels that pop up all the time in 9/11 literature courses. This novel deals with 9/11. It is one of its central twists and events, and the narrator's reaction to 9/11 is, well, not what you would necessarily expect of him considering his life so far, and I'm not entirely sure up to what point this tourist is supposed to stand for, say, a very conservative kind of interventionist American, or up to what point he's supposed to stand in for your average American reader. I cannot necessarily say, honestly say, because I'm not American. And I'll be interested to hear your opinion. Very simply put, do you think that the tourist's, say, disgusted reaction was exaggerated? Did you relate with it? Did you have the same type of relation? Did you come to despise the narrator the more the narrative progressed? Let me know. The novel's secondary characters, especially a few we encounter in New York, are also very interesting. It's not necessarily the case that you get a fully satisfying resolution for each of those, let's call them parallel plots, but that will be, I mean, I'm nitpicking when I say something like that. Also because the novel's actual ending, the ending you do get, while being vaguely, well, it's predictable. I'm sure we all saw it coming, but at the same time, that ending, the way it's structured, it allows, as I show on this scientific diagram, it allows for what I think are at least 6 possibilities, and you're not quite sure which one actually takes place, and that is just genius. It's the kind of shit I adore. If I haven't been clear enough, I absolutely loved The Reluctant Fundamentalist. It was a brilliant experience because of the games it plays with the reader, because of how stimulating it is, and it's beautifully well written, and it's written in an interesting voice. You can hear the narrator's non-being a native speaker, you can hear it in the way the novel is written, and that's just beautiful. Exit West is a very different kind of novel, starting from the fact that it's narrated in the third person. In that sense, it's a much more conventional novel, we could say, in terms of narration. It doesn't play those kinds of games, which are almost, I would say, almost Paul Auster slash Orhan Pamuk kind of literary games. Here it's a more straightforward type of narration, but it's a more peculiar mixture of genres. Exit West begins as the well, basically the story of a country descending into war in a non-specified Southern Asian slash Middle Eastern country, and if I'm supposed to know the country because it's a specific one, then it's my bad, but I thought the novel was played out to make it uncertain what country specifically that was. But then about halfway through, it slides into a bizarre and very stimulating and very fascinating mixture of magical realism, dystopian fiction, and that type of fiction that is, I guess it's technically dystopian, but even more than that, even more than trying to imagine a far-flung future where everything has gone to shit, it tries to foresee the immediate future. It reminded me a lot of a novel called War With the Newts by Karel Capek, great, one of the most beautiful science fiction novels I've ever read by a genius Czech writer, and a novel that tries to foresee in very clear terms the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century, and so many other types of social injustices. Uniting beautifully all of these different genres together throughout the novel is a completely heartbreaking, let's call it, love story, although that is probably too simplistic a term. The love story between these two main characters, Said and Nadia, at the heart of the book. And the book sort of establishes what it is about from the very first pages. In the first 2 pages you read that these two guys, these two kids, meet at an evening class, I'm guessing at their local community college or something like that, in the months before their country descends into war. And the narrator reflects on this fact, on this idea that even in these dramatic times where death is looming on the horizon, people still go about their everyday life. They still meet, they still have coffee, they still fall in love. And that idea is lies behind the entire book. This idea that dramatic, historical and personal events, that great tragedies are always, in a sense, looming on the horizon. Sometimes they may be closer than we expect, sometimes they may strike us even when we don't expect them, but at the same time we keep on living, and that's the way human beings are hardwired. That's the way we behave. And the book juxtaposes beautifully these images, almost mundane images of everyday life of these kids falling in love, establishing a weird relationship. It's not too clear how they feel toward one another for most of the book, but at the same time this is juxtaposed with brutal and terrible images of tremendous violence, of people being oppressed in the worst possible ways, of people behaving as in terrible ways to those who are suffering, to those who are seeking shelter. Exit West, in this sense, engages very strongly and very bravely with the current debate on the migrants crisis, on the situation of migrants, especially in Europe, but in the US too. And it's, once again, it's a heartbreaking book. It's these images of violence, perhaps because they are so sudden, perhaps because they are they come into the narrative, which is otherwise very subtle, very gentle, very educated. This is a book where people rarely, if ever, curse, where even sex is described in very tender terms, and then you get the scene of, say, somebody being executed, and that's brutal, and then you get this looming threat of violence, and the main characters have to escape from more and more, and it creates that almost type of post-apocalyptic sense. That, I would guess, is the last genre which is added to this mixture, and the characters themselves remark on the fact that they're living through apocalyptic times, even though there is no plague, there is no great immense war in this book, at least not on a global scale, but they are still living through a sort of end times. I would also recommend you read Exit West rather fast, not necessarily in a single sitting or a single day, for the very simple reason that this was a painful experience, reading about people behaving this bad, and more broadly than that, the novel itself remarks on the fact that brutality and people being shit is the reality of life, and expecting differently is madness. Beyond that, this constant tension between hope and despair and renewed hope, it was difficult to withstand. It had that effect you find again in some post-apocalyptic fiction, stuff such as The Road. I know people who couldn't finish The Road because it was too strong a novel and too strong an experience. But that should not at all suggest that this is a cruel book or a bitter one. It's just that it's very honest, to the point of being truly painful. Overall, I absolutely recommend these books, both Exit West and Reluctant Fundamentalist. I enjoyed the experience thoroughly, and I'm incredibly happy I found them. Reluctant Fundamentalist truly was a book that blew me away. I loved it. I also enjoyed Exit West very much, perhaps not up to that level, but if you're interested in these themes and in its mixture of genre, if you're interested in these genres, post-apocalyptic, this topic, you have to read Exit West. If you've enjoyed either, it's likely you are going to enjoy the other, for the very simple fact that the style, behind the fact that, once again, they are narrated in very different ways, the style and Hamid's writing, You can find similarities, there's a good chance you're going to enjoy them. If you're on the fence, I'd probably say go with the Reluctant Fundamentalist for the very basic fact that I enjoyed it more, I believe it flows faster, I'm not sure whether it's shorter, but it flows much quicker to me, and it's engaging and you won't be able to put it down. Let me know what you think of these books, whether you've read both, just one, whether you're interested in reading them, and thank you for watching this video. In a second I'll put links on the screen to others of my reviews, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys.